started. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for QuickBooks is Holding Back Growth, discovering when to upgrade to leading ERPs. I'm Alina Atkins from Netronom, and we're excited to partner with our sister company, Third Wave, to walk you through one of the biggest challenges that most growing manufacturing and distribution business faces, and that's simply outgrowing QuickBooks long before you realize it. So over the next 45 minutes, we will explore how modern ERP solutions like NetSuite, SAP Business One, and more can create a single connected source of truth across your entire operation. And we will also have time for a Q&A at the end, so feel free to drop any questions you may have in the chat at any point, and we'll get to those at the end. Also, I did want to mention that just for attending, you will be entered to win a $100 Visa gift card. So stay tuned. At the end of the presentation, I will be putting the winner in the chat. So be on the lookout for that. So let's meet today's speakers. We have with us Kellen Liu, who is the Chief of Staff at Third Wave, and we have our very own CEO of Netronom, Hampton Coakley. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. So guys, if you don't care, give a brief background on who you are, and you guys can take it from here.
Awesome. Thanks, Lena. And thank you, Hampton and the Netronom team for having me. So like Lena mentioned, my name is Kellen. I lead the finance and growth functions at Third Wave. Third Wave is an ERP consulting practice that's part of the same larger family of businesses as Netronom. So our team specializes in North American manufacturing and distribution. And today we primarily do support for SAP products, but we've got this saying over at Third Wave that our company mission is to help manufacturers, love their ERP, right? So that spans beyond just SAP in the way that we try to educate and help our clients and other businesses. Last thing I'll mention, Third Wave is also really well connected with a bunch of other ERP consulting groups that specialize in other software ERPs. So NetSuite, Acumatica, QAD might be names that you guys have heard of. And so in a way, I'm also kind of representing that larger cohort of groups and borrowing on their knowledge base as well. So really excited to be here today. And thanks again to the Netronom team for having me.
Yeah, thanks, Kellen. Thanks for putting this on. Yeah, as Lena said, my name's Hampton Coakley. I'm the CEO at Netronom. We're an IT managed service provider, and what that means is we will more or less act as an internal IT department on a fractional basis for small and medium-sized businesses, all the way from like 20 employees all the way up to about 250. And in my experience, I've been the CEO at Netronom for really actually just the start of this year, but had a variety of experience growing companies most recently with software startups. Before that, a stint in investment banking, doing healthcare mergers and acquisitions. Did global product marketing at Dell Technologies, and started my career off working as a U.S. Senate aide. So I've been all over the place, but I think that's given me a pretty unique perspective as to how all these things piece together. So kicking off the webinar, if we can switch to the next slide, I think it'd be helpful for those watching, as you're watching, try to place your business. And maybe you're a manufacturer, maybe you're in oil and gas, maybe you're not in either of those, but enterprise resource planning systems, they're really, you're at a certain phase maybe early on when you may not need one, and then there are certain triggers throughout the life cycle of your company that are going to tell you, hey, we should probably start looking into that. So if you look at this spectrum that we've put up on the screen, and again, you all can read, so I won't read it out to you, but it's a really good indication of, are you seeing some of these signals in these different phases? And those should be triggers to you to think, okay, are we good with just a basic accounting system and then gluing it all together with Excel? Or do we need something more robust? Because we're starting to see things like multiple facilities, multiple users, and just increasing complexity in the business where there are just a lot more moving parts and a lot more things can go wrong. So moving to the next slide. And Kellen, feel free to chime in if I miss anything. But So starting off, brief overview of what is an enterprise resource planning system. We get these questions sometimes. We'll say, "Oh, have you considered an ERP?" to our customers when we don't sell ERPs at Netronom. But sometimes they'll be like, "Oh yeah, we're set," or "We have this one and we haven't really revisited the conversation," or they hate acronyms and they don't even know what we're talking about, which is fair because once upon a time I didn't know what an ERP system was. So think of it like it just professionalizes and upgrades your business. So you start off and you have your finance function. You have your kind of these individual silos of data processing, whether it's inventory, accounting. Some of these programs try to do a little bit of everything. Some of them try to be specialized, but ultimately, early on, what's gluing them together is Excel spreadsheets. If you want to do site analyses or keep track of things that aren't necessarily a core function of that software. And once you outgrow that, and when you start to outgrow that, some of the key triggers we talked about in the previous slide, you'll sort of know it's more users, more complexity. And one big thing now is auditability. Is there a paper trail of who changed what? And because say you want to grow your business, you want to take outside capital investors. Sometimes they're going to want to see an audit trail of, is that inventory real? Are those receivables real? And having a more robust platform outside of just Excel, where spreadsheets can crash, spreadsheets can go missing, is really, really useful. So yeah, ERP stands for Enterprise Resource Planning System, and just think of it as a weapons grade persistent version of whatever it is that you're doing in Excel, but it can do so much more and talk to and remove some of that manual hassle of exporting spreadsheets and trying to glue everything together. So with that, I'll kick it off to Kellen, who is the real expert on ERP systems, and he will take it from here.
Great. Thanks so much, Hampton. And I'll say for claiming to not know that much about ERP, you did a pretty bang up job on giving the Spark Notes there. So appreciate it. So diving into ERP a bit, Hampton mentioned this earlier, but the most common comparison that we hear about ERP is to QuickBooks. I don't know about you guys, but I get a solid amount of marketing material from ERP publishers like Oracle, and a lot of it is about all the advantages you'll see if you switch from QuickBooks to ERP. And while that's broadly true, and there are many unlocks that we'll cover that come from switching from QuickBooks onto an ERP, I think it's first important we understand how ERP sits within your business compared to a tool like QuickBooks or Xero, so we can better understand where those advantages and unlocks are actually coming from. So I'm going to start with kind of stating the obvious a bit here, but QuickBooks is an accounting tool, right? You can have a more or less robust version of it depending on if you're QuickBooks Online or QuickBooks Enterprise. And I think I've even heard that some of the newest versions have like a CRM attachment. But with QuickBooks or Xero, 95% of what you're getting is a tool that helps with your finance and accounting workflows. So accounting is obviously vitally important to every business, right? Unless you're in a situation with just limitless greenfield and no competitors, knowing your numbers and collecting and tracking your cash is the absolute baseline on running a successful business. And if you're here listening to me, you've probably already figured this out, right? So QuickBooks was an essential tool to get you this far. So ERP can improve some of your QuickBooks functionality, right? But what it's really doing is it's unifying sales, ops, and accounting under a single software platform. With an ERP, all of your data starts on the left side here with sales quotes and sales proposals, flows through your order fulfillment and inventory tracking, and also includes all the cash collection and GL functionality you're getting right now on QuickBooks. For manufacturing businesses and distribution and oil and gas as well, what's probably the biggest unlock with ERP is this ops to accounting workflow living in the same unified software. And so you're going to ask why, right? This might already start to be obvious to some of you, but the biggest reason is that manufacturing decisions directly change financial outcomes immediately. If you've ever had to switch a vendor, you know this, right? So things like inventory, scrap, labor, purchasing, they all hit the books immediately. If your ops team and accounting team are living in separate systems, or if your ops team is just working on spreadsheets, your numbers on the finance side are probably late when something needs updating, or sometimes they're going to be wrong entirely. Another reason why the ops accounting workflow is so important to get right is because inventory is probably your number one asset at any given point. And it doesn't matter like what you make or what you sell, your inventory is always moving. Because of that, you cannot run 100% accurate financials if inventory isn't updated in real time. If it's not tied to production, if it's not tied to purchasing, basically if it's living in a spreadsheet. The last reason I'll talk about right now on why the ops finance unification is so important is costing, right? So true product costing is really complicated. So for some folks in the room, maybe you've been doing rubber manufacturing for 60 years, tire costing is like mental math to you. But for the rest of us, true product costing is really complicated. You need to know material actuals, labor actuals, machine time, overhead, variance, purchase price, and you need to know all of this stuff at the same time for every product batch. And if you're not synced between ops and finance on one system, you're probably not doing true costing, right? So you're probably doing a little bit of guessing on your product margins, or at least you're operating with a pretty healthy standard error there. So there's a lot of reasons that other reasons I can go over on why, I think ERP can generate a ton of value for your business even right now. But to me, those are the top three that are pretty universal for any sort of manufacturing, distribution, oil and gas, basically supply chain type of business.
Yeah, Keller, if I can chime in, I spoke
Absolutely.
with a beverage manufacturer the other day, and he knew down to, I mean, gosh, the penny what it cost him to wrap a pallet in saran wrap, because this guy lives and dies by his ERP system, and no dying, just living, but he's thriving with the ERP system. But yeah, and part of that is he bills that to the customer shipping. So if you're just winging it, think about all the times, just the lost materials that you could have if you're just relying on rounding or something that you're just kind of working on a spreadsheet. But when you can get that level of granularity, it just pays for itself.
Yeah, totally, 100%. So Hampton just mentioned like one of these very common use cases that ERP kind of helps resolve. We're going to go over a couple of those today. The first one we're going to cover is this is a real example from a real ERP project that the Third Wave team worked on earlier this year, and this was with an LCD manufacturer. So these guys are awesome, super smart team. And what they do is build LCD screens using proprietary chemical coatings, right? So essentially, it's like the secret recipe that determines the brightness, the color performance, durability, gamma. I don't even know what gamma means. I just know it's a setting on my TV. Basically, all the things that might be slightly different between different high-end TVs from different brands and models. And what makes this manufacturer's operation so unique is that they have customers all over the world. And every customer gets a slightly different recipe. So their customer in Korea, for example, might want a specific recipe, for say like contrast performance, right? And their Japanese customer might need a different formulation for energy efficiency, right? These formulas to them are trade secrets. So even small deviations from the recipe can have huge impacts on the product quality. So prior to Third Wave's engagement with these guys, they were using a lot of different systems to run their operation. They had like lab management, production records, and separate tools for shipment documentation. And so you can imagine how massive of an upgrade moving all these processes onto a unified ERP was for them. The key feature that I want to talk about here is what we call end-to-end traceability. basically what this is doing is it's creating a single thread all the way from raw materials through formulation and QC to the customer shipment. And by having end-to-end traceability, these guys are able to track all the way back to the exact batch of raw materials if a customer ever called and said there was an issue with a product, right? And what that allows the team to do is troubleshoot the problem and communicate it much more effectively, being able to trace that all the way back to the root cause. It also expands the supply capacity of the team, right? Because before, with all these disparate systems, they were trying to replicate this traceability and putting a ton of time and effort into that, right? And so now that effort can now be put into actually getting more goods out the door. The other thing I want to talk about that was vitally important to our friends here was the protection of the recipe IP, right? So because they were dealing with multiple high-value customers all the time, they had to make sure that the right batch was using the right recipe and the right customer was always getting the right product, always. Without serialization and traceability, you're basically relying on like a human to do a procedural check on every single product batch, which is a ton of time and effort. So LCDs are a pretty niche space, right? But this customer IP protection piece is actually super common, right? It all across electronics, in aerospace, med devices, pharmaceuticals, even cosmetics and food and bev distribution. So this is a case where the need for ERP functionality was already there, and maybe the solution wasn't so obvious if you're not constantly thinking about ERP directly like we are. And versions of these use cases are really common when we think about what kind of problems ERP can solve for your business.
Kellen, we've got a question.
Yeah.
In the Q&A from Paul. How seamlessly can data migration from QuickBooks and other legacy systems be done, along with cleaning, mapping, and verification processes?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm going to talk about kind of what goes into switching onto your first ERP in a bit, but from a high level, it is a big lift. One of the really important things to get right during implementation is data migration, especially on the financial side. And so that leads into solution selection, which we're going to talk about, but more importantly, like partner selection, selecting the right implementation partner to make sure they understand your business and are going to do that data migration piece correctly with you. But great question. So jumping into the solution selections piece a little bit. So I mentioned earlier that Third Wave is part of a larger portfolio of ERP consulting firms. So we're lucky enough to be able to aggregate a bunch of information from all the major software players. Typically, most of this information is only going to be circulated within each software ecosystem. And so if you were doing your own self-discovery, you'd be looking at probably just one, maybe two products at a time. So for the purposes of fitting this all on just one slide, I'm gonna narrow it down to kind of the 5 most common ERPs for manufacturing and distribution businesses. So that's NetSuite, Infor, Acumatica, Business One, and Microsoft Business Central. The first thing I'll call out is that across the board, your first year total cost is going to be about the same. It's going to be around $150,000 to just over $200,000. So only about 20 to 40% of that costs the software itself. The rest is going to be on implementation. And to your question, Paul, making sure that we get the data migration along with the software installation 100% correct, right? And the question I get asked all the time is, could we implement ERP ourselves? And the answer I give is almost always, please do not try, because you will mess it up. It's one thing to be a user of the software. It's an entirely different beast to become certified to be an implementer. And unless you lived a previous life as an ERP implementer and have successfully installed the software for your type of business, this is not a path I think most folks want to go down. And in fact, some publishers like SAP don't even allow folks to purchase the software directly. You have to go through an implementation partner, because they know that someone will try and probably fail and then blame the product. So let's get that out of the way first. The second thing I'll mention is on the pricing models and the deployment models here. So these are often very related. So you got basically two main deployment models: on-prem or cloud. Cloud's a little bit more self-explanatory. The publisher will partition out part of their servers. You'll log onto the software via desktop or web app. Makes it super simple. No hardware to manage. Hosting fees are baked into the price of the software. For most folks, cloud is going to be the way to go because it's easier to manage. I do want to, however, talk about on-prem because there are some advantages for manufacturing businesses specifically for going on-prem. The first is cost. So typically when you go on-prem, instead of doing a subscription model, you're going to be on what's called a perpetual model, where you're going to own that version of the license indefinitely. And optionally, you will pay what's called maintenance. This is typically like 10 to 20% of the license price of the software per year. And if you pay that, you'll basically get access to all the future versions the same way you would if you were on subscription. So how the math shakes out there is that in the first 2 to 3 years, subscription is going to be lower cost, right? But after that, because your maintenance rate is lower than your subscription rate, your total cost of ownership actually becomes more affordable on-prem in years 4, 5, 6, and beyond. So that's a consideration for some folks. The other thing I'll talk about is connectivity, right? So manufacturing plants can be based anywhere, right? A lot of times in pretty rural areas where internet connectivity isn't always or sometimes can be an issue, right? And if you're cloud-based, your ERP access is always tied to your internet access. So if a line goes down, your ERP is it's not going to work until you have internet access again. That's not a problem if you're on-prem. You're still going to be able to run fine via your local intranet, even without internet connection. So I'm not going to go through everything because there's a lot of information, but please feel free to take a screenshot. One more thing I will call out real quick is this frequent updates piece on Acumatica and on Microsoft Business Central. So I love Acumatica from a user perspective. I think it's super user friendly. It's got a beautiful UI. BC I'm less excited about, but it's the only one on here built by Microsoft, which already makes everything else you run. So the integrations are super powerful. But anyways, both Acumatica and Microsoft are going to sell you on this frequent updates piece as a feature, that they're constantly working on bug fixes and you're getting the latest and greatest all the time. That's true. But what it also means is that if you've got any non-native integrations, meaning integrations not made by the publishers or any add-ons, every time there's an update, those might not work for a little bit, right? Sometimes it's fine, sometimes it's down for an hour, sometimes it's down for a day, until those add-on pieces of software get updated as well. And if you've got any customizations in the code, you're going to also need to update the code probably. So if you do end up going down that route, you want to make sure your support partner is really responsive. If you're in Acumatica or in the Business Central space. So again, I'm not going to go through everything, but I'll let this hang for just a minute before I move on, if folks want to take a screenshot. Awesome. Okay, so I do want to dig a little deeper into the cost numbers that I showed on the last slide, just to kind of give a little bit more color on what that looks like after the first year. So regardless of what the solution and pricing model that you choose, your annual costs after year one are going to be much lower than your year one numbers, right? It depends on if you go perpetual or subscription, but on average, if we're talking about 5 to 7 ERP users, you're going to be looking at about 25 to 50,000 annually to renew the software, so stay on the latest version, and get a little bit of support services on it, right? So anytime you need to troubleshoot something, maybe there's an add-on module you want to add, that's a lot better than $180,000, $200,000 upfront, but it's still much more expensive than QuickBooks, right? And so how do we justify that cost? The equation I want you to really be thinking about isn't the direct cost of the ERP, but rather does going on ERP generate more net value than it's going to cost over time? And if you're a growing business, the answer is probably yes. And I'm going to talk about why. So the first thing I want to talk about is going on ERP saves your finance team a ton of time. And honestly, like probably a future headcount or two. All that time that the finance team's currently spending on analysis, trying to figure out, your product margin in South Carolina in Q1, you can see that instantly on any ERP software. Accounting also gets a much easier and tighter, especially if you're doing any sort of like inventory reconciliation. That stuff is instantaneous. We've already talked about some of the ops team savings you'll get, right, by unifying that ops and finance piece under the same software. So what you're really doing is you're unblocking your business and you're finding your team more time. So you're going to be able to do much more down the line with a smaller team. So I know some of you are going to try to go back to this to your CFO and with these, year one and recurring numbers, and that's as far as you're going to be able to get. But I'm not here to hide anything from you. Instead, what I'm trying to convince you on and show you is that ERP can be a producing asset, especially for manufacturing and supply chain types of businesses. And so you should be thinking and framing ERP as an investment, right? You're unlocking potentially new lines of business down the line or new markets while you're reducing your long-term headcount and tooling costs. All right, so let's go through another use case example. This is very recent for us. Happened earlier this year. So this particular company, they're a food and bev distributor that sources food all over North America, and then also gets their packaging and peripherals from overseas, from places like India and China. So this is already, as you can imagine, a really challenging process on its own, just working and dealing with international vendors in a thin margins line of business like food and bev. But with the introduction of tariffs earlier this year, that added a whole new wrinkle that was basically enough to bottleneck their entire business, right? So the especially challenging part of the tariffs, as you guys know, was that they were constantly changing, right? News would come out and the rates would change, and folks would get notices rolling in on the new rate for China, and someone would have to go into every product's bill of materials or the item master and make a change on what that tariff rate was, right? And if you're sourcing multiple different types of products from multiple different vendors from all these different countries, that can be really challenging. And so you're trying to keep up with, several new notices a week while still trying to fulfill orders and making sure you're charging the right price to your customers. And product costing basically becomes the most important thing to make sure you get right. Otherwise, you're not going to maintain your margins. So for these guys, what we were able to do with ERP is build out an item database that automatically identified the country of origin for a product and automatically applied the correct tariff rate at the time of purchase, right? So that goes back into the tying between the finance and ops pieces. Instead of updating the items over and over again anytime a new notice comes in, all they had to do was manage a tariff table, right? So six or seven different countries, each one had a tariff rate for the type of product, and if they got a new notice, just update that, and that would automatically flow through the costing, the sales quotes, and onto any compliance documentation that they had to provide. So for this team, this saved them a ton of time, allowed them to fulfill a ton of more orders, while their competitors who didn't have this type of solution, were moving at much slower pace to try to not risk compliance issues. And so you can see how through like this example and the earlier example on batch traceability that we're just stacking these types of use cases throughout a business with ERP, right? And so you can see some of where this like not so obvious value of ERP can come from. And trust me, every business in this space has these types of problems that ERP can solve. And you're probably already thinking of some at your own right now today. Okay, so we've gone through a couple examples. I want to now go over some of the other things that you should keep in mind as you progress in your ERP discovery. So we already went over budget a little bit. So let's go to timeline, this next piece here. So typically, you'll want to reserve at least 6 months for a new implementation, and ideally up to a year if you think you're going to need some more functionality, right? So if you are in a space that is compliance heavy, or if your manufacturing process is especially complex, you're probably going to want to budget a bit of a longer lead time. So this is something timeline is something that's going to be covered in a lot of detail very early in your discovery process with any implementer worth their salt. But just keep this framework in mind as you try to figure out business priorities, right? Like, so when over the next 2-3 years is the best time to do something like this. You also want to know what your non-negotiables are, right? So this is going to be different for everyone.
Real quick before you go to non-negotiables, touching on budget.
Yep.
Have you seen, 150 to 250 is a big pill to swallow. Have you seen any ways to capitalize the cost, or have any of your customers, explored any kind of financing, or how, do people typically break that up, or is it something that they just that is something that they allocate for that year? How are people thinking about that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I personally have not seen capitalization as a common practice for the folks that we've worked with. However, what I have seen at times is like parent entities. So it could be a shareholder or a private equity institution kind of paying for the cost on their books for either one business or multiple businesses to do a project like this, so that lifts the costs out of the operating business itself. But I personally have not seen capitalization, but that's a good question, something to dig into for sure. Awesome. So going back to non-negotiables. These are going to be different for every business. A lot of this is going to be tied to your industry and compliance within that industry. Some of it's going to be tied to like your business culture and your competitive advantage or differentiator, right? So is there a way that you're currently out competing, and what operational processes is that built from, right? That process, those processes, those need to be preserved or replicated or even improved upon when you go to an ERP and are looking at new functionality. The next thing is figuring out exactly who's going to be a user and who's going to be a reader within your team. So typically when we start folks off, we'll do like 4 to 5 users, and including whoever's driving the bus on the implementation from the business side. And then we'll add a couple readers as well, typically folks on the leadership team. So once you figure out who your users and readers are, take the time to sit down and ask them what they're struggling with most today, right? You might already know some of this, but it doesn't hurt to ask again and have it down on paper so you know how to make this process change like really exciting for them, right? Because it is going to be a lot of change from a workflow perspective. The last thing I'll cover is scalability and product lifecycle. So these kind of tie into one another a little bit. So one thing you're going to be hyper-focused on as you go through ERP discovery is figuring out how the product fits in with your business today, right? I also recommend asking yourself how the system should work for your business in 5 years, right? So imagine your business in 5 years. Where have you expanded? What does the team look like? Does this software that you're picking still serve that version of your business well, right? This is a long-term investment that you're making, both on the solution and on the implementation partner side. So make sure that you're picking something that makes sense for a long time. on the implementation partner piece, you really want to make sure you pick a good one there. Make sure they have a great track record. If they have like a G2 page, go check that. Ask to talk to their customers if they let you do that, and make sure they have extensive experience working with companies similar to yours, so within your industry and ideally within your subvertical as well. Losing an implementation partner or support partner can be really painful, right? You're potentially losing a lot of domain knowledge about your business and how your software technology was built if that handoff from one partner to another isn't managed super well. So cool. These are kind of the key other things to be thinking about in your ERP selection process. Okay. So some of you might have stopped paying attention completely when I flashed up the 200K price tag. But if you're still interested in digital transformation, but balked at the price of ERP, there is another option. So in the past 10 years, some of these, what I call ERP-Lite tools, have started gaining traction with manufacturers and distributors. Basically, what you're getting with an ERP-Lite tool is a stripped down version of traditional ERP. So you get inventory, warehouse management, kind of more simplified, without any CRM and finance functionality, but your total cost of ownership of the product is like 15% compared to a full-scale ERP. So there's two kind of immediate advantage to this, right? Firstly, the cost. When you take this to your CFO, they don't immediately hang up the phone on you. The second is that the ROI is a lot easier to visualize when the advantages are kind of more tangible and the cost is lower. So the one that we're most excited about here at Third Wave is Sin 7. And the reason that we're most excited about Sin 7 compared to some of the other ERP-Lite tools available is Sin 7 is the only one with an inventory module that's most comparable to a traditional ERP. So kind of going into the history here a little bit, Sin 7 was originally built to be a Sage Intacct inventory add-on, right? So it was a standalone inventory tracking software first, and then over time they added bill of materials, shop floor, production, and then I think today they also have a skeleton CRM. But what they've had the most time to flesh out is their inventory tracking, which for supply chain business like yours is probably where your Excel spreadsheets are breaking the most today, right? So typically when folks do go on one of these ERP-Lite tools like Sin 7, they'll pair it with an existing accounting tool. So Sin 7 has a native integration with QuickBooks Online or QuickBooks Enterprise, right? If you're fancy, you're using Xero, it's got an integration there as well. So you'll stay on that on the finance side and then make use of that native integration to pipe the data through from your ops and inventory and warehouse over to the finance side. There's fewer overall integrations available with ERP-Lite tools, but one advantage of that is that all those integrations are typically native. So they're made by the publisher, right? And for Sin 7 and for other similar tools, e-commerce, some of the most common e-commerce integrations are available. So like things like Shopify, Amazon, WooCommerce, those integrations are all native, and you won't have to worry about that. The last thing I'll touch upon again is the cost and the speed. Software is super affordable. The integrations are low cost, sometimes free, and the speed to implement is really, really, really fast compared to the full-scale ERP. That's because, well, first of all, the software is simpler, right? But more importantly, going back to Paul's question earlier, there's no financial data to do migration on, right? You'll still need to migrate a lot of your ops data, so like orders and items and stuff like that. But all of that like historical financial rigor, there's no need to move any of that. You just need to make sure you're syncing the data layers correctly between this tool and your existing accounting system. So typically, I would say ERP-Lite tools aren't meant to be your forever tool. They're robust and can work for your business for a really long time. But if you're gearing up for, like a 5 or 10-year growth cycle, your needs will probably outscale what ERP-Lite tools can offer, right? But it's a great way to kind of build that motion, start single sourcing your data, and kind of put on the wheels for your team to start using a tool like ERP. And the last thing I'll mention here, and I know we're running a little bit low on time, if inventory isn't your biggest problem right now, there are other options. So please, reach out and we can talk about some of the other tools in this ERP-Lite space that are available. So I'll kind of skip this for now, just in the interest of time. But here's a quick comparison of ERP-Lite and ERP. So going back to the slide that Hampton covered in the beginning, in this framework of where folks are in their growth journey on the business processes side, let's try to align some of this like digital transformation stuff we've talked about with ERP-Lite and ERP that might and the pathways that might make the most sense depending on where your business is. And so this is not comprehensive, right? But this is just meant to be kind of a starting point. So if you're kind of still on spreadsheets and your biggest problems are data errors, and you're working off of the minds of 1 or 2 people, going on an ERP-Lite tool like Sin7 might make sense for you, right? It's cheaper, it's fast to implement, and just kind of gets your business processes all in the same place so you can start moving in the same direction. If you're on the other side of the spectrum here and you've already got a ton of different systems, but they're not super smooth, or they're heavily customized, and you've got maybe compliance and traceability concerns that you've kind of shoved aside just to make sure we're getting orders in quickly, and you're gearing for growth, right? You just don't know how to unlock it. What I would recommend is really looking at whether an ERP can be a true unlock for your business. And if you're in the middle here, I think you can go either direction, depending on what the future state, that 5-year time horizon looks like for your business. And sometimes when you're in the middle here, even I would say waiting for a little bit might be the right decision, right? Maybe you're waiting, you're at like an inflection point within your product line or a new potential customer, and you need to see if that lands, then you can see that path to growth, and maybe this way makes sense. Or if you're like, no, we found our product market fit and we like where we're at, we just need to clean up the business a little bit, then maybe ERP-Lite could be the way to go as well. So there's a lot of things to think about here, right? Really, there's an infinite number of things to think about here, and that can be really daunting. So what we've done at Third Wave is try to templatize some of that into what we call an ERP maturity assessment. So this is something that we're trialing. So if you are at all interested about going down this path and learning more about all the different systems out there and figuring out what's right for your business, please reach out to me and let's chat. We'll run this maturity assessment over a call. It's completely free. And honestly, part of it is just an excuse for me to nerd out about your business and understand what makes it work. And so, yeah, we're really excited to share in this journey with you. And thanks again to the Netronom team for having me.
Yeah, thanks for doing this. This is really helpful. We've had a number of questions come up just in our travels and talking to customers, and we're really lucky to have a partner like Third Wave to provide that just third-party expertise to our customers and give some objectivity, because ultimately we just want everyone to end up with the tool that works best for them. So with that, we've got a couple minutes for questions. Anything from the audience? If not, I'll turn it back over to Alina.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, guys. I don't believe there's any more questions, but I am giving I'm going to send out a message. So Courtney White, you are the winner of our $100 Visa gift card, and you should be receiving an email shortly from me. It will be aadkins@netronom.com. So just be on the lookout for that. And again, we just want to thank everyone. We want to thank Kellen from Third Wave and Hampton from Netronom. Just with this webinar. It was very insightful on what an ERP system actually is and how it can actually help your business. So be on the lookout for our next webinar coming up. And again, if you have any questions about ERP systems, please reach out to Kellen for an ERP maturity assessment. We hope you guys have a good rest of your day, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thanks so much, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you all.